Okay, so today I want to do sort of a continuation of my last YouTube video where I talked about a hidden thing that can help accelerate your growth as an artist. Now, I'll put a link to that video in the description down below, but a quick summary is that I talked about feedback loops. And that's essentially where each part of your process communicates to other parts of your process. And if you have an awareness of this, it can really help you pick the projects you do and kind of persuade you to see each project through so that you can maximize those benefits. So check out that video. But here today, I'm going to talk about a different thing. They sort of relate, but it's a different topic. And I really think this can be helpful to many of you. Now, this other hidden thing that can really accelerate your growth as an artist is teaching. Now, hang with me, don't click off. I'm not actually suggesting you get a teaching gig. I know that many of us become artists because we don't want to talk to people and we just want to hide in our studio. So I get it. You don't want to talk to people, but don't worry. There are so many different ideas and lessons and techniques you can take from the mindset of teaching and apply right now in your studio by yourself without other cellular entities. Now, when I completed my studies, I felt like I had a lot of ideas. And the core of that idea was form, the idea of modeling things three-dimensionally and making it look very credible and having a process that was sort of optimized for that, where I essentially would work through and kind of finish form by form. So I would work through things in a very careful manner and I would really try to make it look three-dimensional. But there were also many, many other things that I had to think about that went into making a painting. And those things would include color, perspective, anatomy, structure, any number of things. And I felt like all of the ideas that I had were sort of a mess. And maybe many of you can relate to this. And I think it's probably more true for those of you that are trying to piece together your own study through YouTube videos, artists you follow on Patreon, and maybe workshops you take. Basically, when you're sort of scattered over a lot of different information sources and you're trying to piece together your own education, I think you can just end up with a lot of different ideas swimming around your head and you don't really know what to do, when to do it, how to do it, and what path to follow. And I think that can be very, very confusing. And for my own part, I went and studied at a specific school and I had a very clear message, form, and a very distinct process. And I still had that same amount of confusion. Now, I sort of stumbled along and I started making paintings, professional paintings, and they were consistent enough, or at least good enough to whatever degree, to be able to get a teaching job. And so I started teaching at a school in New York City, and it was essentially the next iteration of the school I studied at. When I studied, it was like a private little atelier, and then it became a broader academy at the time I came and started teaching. So I came in and I had to talk to these other artists, people that were trying to do this very seriously, and they were trying to work in a very specific method, the one that I just learned. And now I had to communicate this process and these ideas, and I had to assemble them in a way that not only gave the person I was talking to the confidence that I knew what I was talking about, but also gave them an actual actionable path forward on whatever project they were working on and whatever problems they were encountering. And by the way, this turned out to be a real love of mine. It's what I love most about teaching. It's not working with the people. That's, you deal with that. No, I'm kidding. But it's the problem solving. It's the coming up to someone's painting or drawing, wherever they're at, and trying to figure out not only what's wrong with that particular piece, but where their personal thinking might be wrong, or where their habits are getting in the way, or their mindset's interfering, and trying to problem solve across the board, in a very practical way, in a psychological way. I think it's very, very, very interesting. But what that did was it began to organize that jumble of thoughts I had, all of that stuff kicking around. And it even broadened to include the things that I didn't really learn in my studies. And I'm not being critical of my studies. They were very focused. They were about form. They were about this process, repeating this process and trying to get the form to look three-dimensional. But there were big gaps in my education at that point. I didn't really know a lot about color, right? I didn't have a clear sense of how color fit into the context of my process. I had color theory. I had a sense of color theory. I had terminology like hue, value, and chroma. But the phenomenon of light wasn't totally paired up with my form conception. Well, suddenly I had to start explaining this, right? And there were things that I had a sense of. There were trends I was aware of. And as soon as I had to start explaining this to another person, and 30 people who were doing this on a high level throughout the day, I started to really get a sense of how it all fit together. So my understanding, all of those thoughts began to organize very, very clearly just through the act of explaining it to other people that were at different levels. And so that was incredibly powerful in terms of organizing my own thoughts. So that's the first part of it. Then what happened was I started to realize there was a certain lag. I would teach all day, I would explain all these things, and I got better at that over time to where I felt very confident about the information I was putting out there or the narrative I was selling in terms of how things worked conceptually and technically, how one could implement these ideas into their own projects. Then I would go home and I would look at my own painting, or I'd begin to work on my own painting, and I'd start to do all of the things I was suggesting these other artists not to do. And I was not doing any of the things I was telling them they ought to do. So there was a real disconnect between the sort of rational structure I was assembling as a teacher and what I was actually practicing as an artist. So the mess was getting cleaned up and cleared up when I was teaching. Up here, things were getting organized, but me, the artist, Scott in the studio, was still a mess. It was just a complete mess. And I started to realize that, and I started to think, God, like, why is it I can go in there and I can lay this out so rationally and clearly to other people? And why is it I can look at their work so, I guess, objectively or calmly, and yet in my own studio, I can't do that? And there's a real psychological barrier there. Number one, I'm not emotionally tied to how my particular student is performing. I mean, I care. There's a bit, it's like emotional setting 3, right? But with me, it's like a raw nerve. And I realized I obviously couldn't see my own work objectively or for what it was. And so I decided to just very literally role play as my own teacher. Or at the very least, I would pretend that my painting wasn't my painting. It was the first time I was seeing it. And when I would come back to my studio the next day after my marathon day of teaching at the academy, I would sit down, look at my painting, and I would out loud give myself the same kind of critique that I had just given a bunch of artists the day before. So I'd sit there and I'd look at it and I'd be like, all right, well, I think that, a lot of the drawing is really clear. The structure's good. I like the midline. But if I work off of that to this, whatever it is, right, I'd start to kind of talk through it in this very rational way. And I would also try to do something I talk about very often, which is I'd also try to look for the positive things. And I would do that, number one, because I wanted people to like me. That's how it started, I'll admit it. But ultimately, I realized the power in finding the things that are working and saying them out loud, right? So that you can really give yourself a home base or a recourse to work back out to the problem areas. So I would start to look at my work, which my default mode was to be extremely negative. And just like with the artists I'd work with at the academy, I'd start to lay out first the things that are working. Okay, that neck, the sternocleidomastoid, it comes down and inserts here. I think the value range here works quite well, but then, well, we'll come back to that. So I'd lay this foundation of what was working in my painting. And it turns out that is the part I was almost missing, and why I was in a perpetual tailspin, is that I wasn't taking the time to sort out the painting and see the things that were working. So that was one of the first things that really happened when I became my own teacher. So I would find the things that are working well, and then I'd be like, okay, but now this doesn't quite make sense. This is illogical. If the light's coming from the upper left, and this is more light facing, then that has to be lighter than this over here, but yet I have it the same value, or I actually have it darker, right? So I'd see a little logic thing, which is something I would lay out for some of my students. I would be like, look, here's a case I can make. And I think that's something you want to think about when you become your own teacher, is that you're trying to make logical arguments. You're trying to give a person a path towards your thinking. You don't want to just say something. That's the worst kind of teaching. We've all had art teachers like this. They're the worst. When they just tell you what's wrong, but they don't explain why or their thinking, right? Because then you have no path there yourself in the future. You can't apply it to another scenario. Just because so-and-so master artist came by and was like, that's too dark. That's too dark. Doesn't give you any sense of how to discover when something is too dark, light, or any other problem in the future. So you want to explain it from a logical point of view. You want to make the case for it. You want to do that on top of a foundation of things that are working. And now you sort of rationally and logically work towards those things that are problematic. Now, if you just do this on your own for yourself. And if you do this every time you start a new session, I'm not telling you have to do it after every break during that session, although maybe you'll benefit from that. I don't know. But if you start every 3-4 hour session or every day that you sit down and paint just in this way and give yourself 5 minutes, and if it's painful, set a timer. Set a time. That's anytime something's painful or you can't find the discipline to do it, set a timer and just do it within that time frame and make it a short amount of time. You always want to do things, in a way that you can sustain it. So set a timer for 5 minutes on your phone, sit down and pantomime, role play this thing that I'm telling you. First, start to critique it, pretend as much as you can it's not your work, find the things that are working, and then as you get to the things that aren't working, try to make it a logical, sort of persuasive argument, not just a list of what's wrong, but a persuasive argument as to why it's wrong so that you can start to improve your thinking and your analysis. Then you start to come up with those ideas, and then you add to it this feature, which is very important. How do you actually fix it, right? There's what's wrong. Why is it wrong? How do you fix it at this stage? And of course, that varies. If it's a drawing and the drawing just has 8 million lines everywhere, it's all sketched in, and it's time to solidify those shapes, you can do something I do in all of my drawing videos, which is after however many lines I have down, I roll my kneaded eraser over it to lighten all those lines so that my new lines stand out. And that just eliminates confusion, and it means your new statements are going to stand out and be more profound and clear. So that's something that you might recommend to a student, and if you become your own teacher, it's something you might recommend to yourself, which stops you from just reacting in the moment. Now you have a plan. You said it out loud to yourself. So now it's firm in your mind, and you did it through this process of analyzing what was good, what was wrong, and you gave yourself a plan, and you did it without touching the drawing, without touching the painting, which is what starts to snowball out of control. So by pausing and doing this alone is just going to make your approach back in much calmer. It could be that you're analyzing your painting in a later stage and there's all this paint down, right? And you have many layers down and you have these different artifacts and seams emerging as you layer the paint, and that's annoying. And that might be chief among your problems. So how do you fix that, right? How would you tell someone else to fix that if you were teaching them, right? You think of things in a much more practical way. Think about like a interaction you might have with a person just on any other sort of personal level. If somebody else freaks out around you, don't you start to take on that kind of calm demeanor, like, hold on, because it's annoying when people freak out, right? And so you're like, hang on, all right, it's not that bad, okay? Like, we can solve this, right? Whatever the problem is. And if you're the person that tends to freak out, which is, I think, for a lot of us who are artists to begin with, and any of us who are making art, we become neurotic just by the process of making art. We are that anxious person. So if you can just not be that person for a moment, which this is what this whole suggestion is about, by being your own teacher, you sort of step out of that neuroticism, out of that anxiety, the anxiety that comes from making it and having problems as you work through a painting. And you can just be like that person that's like, hey, this isn't that bad. Like, you can just take the palette knife and scrape that down a little bit, blow the dust away, oil it out, mix a little refined linseed oil with some, solvent and brush that over. It'll make it glossy again. You'll see the color again. I get you're annoyed right now. You couldn't see the color and you painted it again and the texture is weird. So scrape it down a little bit, oil it out, mix and match that color. Whatever it is you would tell someone else calmly, rationally, logically as a path forward, you need to get in the habit of telling yourself that. And it's so crazy because it sounds like common sense, but we don't do that. I didn't do it for years. Even well after I was teaching, it took me a while to really realize how much I needed to implement this. So again, you don't need to get a teaching job. You don't have to go out and start teaching people. You can just do this now, and you can keep it really simple. 5 minutes. Just give yourself 5 minutes at the beginning of every drawing and painting session to do this. Set the timer. Start with the positive. Pretend you're talking to someone else. Find those problem areas in relationship to those things that are working, and then give yourself actionable plans to move forward before you touch the drawing and painting. That will make a huge difference. Now, teaching also helped me expand my knowledge into areas that I didn't know a lot about. So when I would go and teach at the academy, a lot of those artists were very serious, and a lot of them had knowledge in areas that I was far from expert in. And one of those was anatomy. I had taken a number of anatomy classes. I took a lecture in the Florence Academy. I took a lecture class at the Art Students League. I read anatomy books, and it just, every time I filled one ear, it would fall out the other every time I went to bed at night, and I'd wake up like completely blank when it came to anatomy. And what happened was when I was teaching at the academy, I'd be trying to explain something, and I'd be like, the little indent there on the arm, the Peregrine took. I never knew what I was talking about, right? And I'd always end up saying things like the arm bone, the arm hole, things like that. And it was really embarrassing because 9 out of 10 times the students there would be like, "Oh, you mean the such and such fossa, the epicondyle?" And I'd be like, "Yeah, I just wanted to, I had to make sure you knew what the epicondyle." And so I had so many experiences like that that I went home and I learned anatomy, and there was the social pressure, the humiliation factor that made it stick. It turns out that makes you remember things when you get embarrassed. So that I would say actually kind of required teaching. That actually required the pressure of other hominids. So, that's a little exception to what I'm laying out here, but that is an area, and there are other areas like that where when you teach, it puts the pressure on to really kind of know what you're talking about. So that's something to keep in mind. And maybe you do want to get a teaching. Maybe I'm teaching myself here. Maybe you do want a teaching job. But right now, let's go back to things you can actually benefit from here in a practical sense in your own studio. This kind of brings me to my last bit of advice, and something that I think is kind of interesting because it connects to other self-help stuff I've seen over the years on the internet. And I didn't really realize it until recently, even though I'd been doing it for quite a while. So I started teaching online back in 2014, like 11 years ago, way before other people. I know COVID made it to where everyone, even people that don't paint, teach painting online. I do it a lot of different ways, but I would say the real heart and soul of it is my overlays and my critiques. My overlays are where I prepare a digital image and I kind of work over someone's progress and make notations. And then going along with that is my in-depth written critique. So I'll have notations A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And I essentially try to do all the things I talked about earlier in the video, where I go through and I find the things that are working. I try to find the things that aren't working, and then I try to come up with a real plan, real practical, technical way to move forward on those issues and improve the drawing or painting. But the difference here, the difference in doing this compared to when I would teach in person, is that I was writing it down. And the act of writing, just the sort of demand to communicate clearly in sentences, not to be talking extemporaneously off the top of my head in a conversational manner, but to really clearly, succinctly put it into sentences and sort of build a story, organized my thoughts exponentially faster. And I found that in that period, kind of looking back, I can compare it, right? So I finished my studies in 2006, and then I began teaching in one form or another, and then eventually at the academy shortly thereafter, and continued to do so all the way up until about 2015. And then from 2014 till now, I've been teaching online, workshops as well, but mostly online. So mostly written. I started to realize the incredible boost in confidence I had in my thinking and my ability to explain and understand and think through things and problem solve. Writing is so powerful because by its very nature, it just forces you to organize your thoughts more. And I think that's incredibly powerful. Now, what do you do with this? Well, you could probably imagine any number of things, but you could also try to augment your self-teaching, this role-playing as your teacher, with some written critiques made for you yourself. Now, it's kind of interesting because one thing I've encountered so often with artists I work with online is that they really see things in their own work, issues, after they take a photograph of their drawing or painting to email it to me for a review. And I think that's rather similar to something I do all the time, which is look at a mirror reflection of my drawing or painting to kind of get an objective view by flipping it. And also by looking at a reflection, you kind of double your distance from it, so it kind of reduces it. But whatever it is that gives you kind of that detachment from it being your own work, I think can be incredibly helpful at helping you get objectivity and sort of see it at a distance, literally, and see those issues. Now, what you could do, if you were so inclined, is after you take an image of your work, which we all do, we all document our own work and look at images on our phone of whatever we're drawing and painting. Sit down and try writing, typing up a critique, putting it into sentence form. I'm only recommending this if you do the first part of this video. Begin with the easier one, the more informal one. I don't want to alienate you or discourage you on this idea right away. So try with the verbal critique. That's enough, and I did that for a long time. But if that's working and clicking, and you want another alternative, another kind of idea that might really organize your thoughts, try writing them out. Try doing a written critique. I will tell you that my experience and my sense of this is that it's very profound and can really accelerate your understanding, the solidity of your thoughts, and ultimately your growth, because it'll improve your confidence, it'll improve your analytical skills and your sort of organizational skills in terms of the ideas you have, the notions you have about the problems, and the paths forward in terms of fixing it. So it's really something to try. And I think that any one of these things you can do right now and potentially hopefully accelerate your growth as an artist. So kind of a hidden thing, sort of, and it's something I think that could really help you. So check out that last video, the one about the feedback loops. If you think about that and let that video and the information in that video give you a sense of how you should structure your projects, how you should look at them. And the real encouragement there is to do complete projects beginning to end, drawing to painting, and do that on repeat with a stable structure. That's sort of the essence of that video. If you're to do that, and then to build into that this teaching mentality and these tips and techniques that I outlined, I think it'll really help. It'll really help. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you like my content, be sure to check me out on patreon.com/ScottWaddell. That's a great way to support this YouTube channel. And it's also a great way for you to get access to tons of tutorials, like hundreds of hours, full tutorials, portrait painting, still life painting, landscape, drawing, everything. Master copy Bouguereau paintings. That's on that Patreon. It's just $12 a month. You can cancel it anytime if you don't like subscriptions, but you still want some tutorial content. You can check out my art videos on my website. That's scottwaddellfineart.com. Those are downloads. You download them, you keep them. If you have trouble with your download, you can email me. I can send you streaming links to any of those. So they're very easy to watch, and you own those. They're yours to keep, no subscription. And while you're on my website, if you want to look into my online classes, those are all one-on-one with me. We talk about all these things. Many people take portraiture with me. We work A to Z, feedback loops, and I can give you some example as to how you might teach yourself in the future after those classes with me. So check that out if you want. And if nothing else, I'll see you in the next video. Thanks.